With this season being the 30th anniversary for the Toronto Raptors, the franchise has spent a lot of the year dipping into their nostalgia bag to distract fans from the very mid-year that they're having. Well, not too long ago, the Raptors Twitter page tweeted out a Raptors all-time starting five. Kyle Lowry at the point, Vince Carter at the 2, DeRozan and Kawhi as the wings, and Bosh at center. And they added a caption to this post with, quote, "Who would beat this lineup?" Well, that got me thinking there's probably a lot of all-time franchises starting fives that could top that lineup. And the more you look into it, there are some pretty wild lineups that you can make throughout history for each team, and the ones at the top might actually surprise you. So why don't we get right into it and go through every single franchise and rank their all-time starting five.
Showtime!
Before we get into it, there's a few rules we got to address on how we're actually going to rank these players and the teams. First and foremost, we're not going to knock any older player for coming from earlier eras. Meaning, for example, with the Denver Nuggets, David Thompson during his prime was an MVP runner-up, and although if you teleported him to today, Jamal Murray would most likely dance circles around him, Jamal at this point in his career hasn't even been an all-star, so if it came down to it, David Thompson would get the spot over Jamal Murray. Now, when it comes to the stats, I will be nerfing some of the older ones. The fact that pretty much every single center was averaging 20 rebounds for a hot minute isn't possible today, so I will keep that in mind. Secondly, I believe that the best way to imagine this is by looking at each of these teams as if they were currently facing off in a season right now. This means that there won't be any duplicate players on this list, and wherever a player had their best year, that's what team they're going to be on. So for example, although Hakeem Olajuwon did technically play a single season for the Toronto Raptors, he was 39 and averaging 7 points. His best season was 93-94 with the Rockets, so he'll be put on the Rockets. And to make it even easier, I'll be adding which specific year I'm referencing on the graphic so it'll be easier to follow along. We'll break each of these teams down by a couple of categories, starting off with the teams that would most likely finish at the bottom of the standings. And honestly, just in the best interest of time, I'm just gonna flash through these bottom teams on the screen right now, or else this video would be 40 minutes long and mind-numbingly boring. We'll really dive deep into the teams once we get into the ones that would most likely finish in the play-in contention area. And remember, this is my own opinion, so don't go to the comments freaking out if your favorite team isn't where you want them to be. Or do, I don't really care, it helps the algorithm at the end of the day. But starting it off at 20, we have the Phoenix Suns. At point, you got Steve Nash, at the 2, you got Devin Booker, the wings are Sean Marion and Charles Barkley, and at center, you have Amari Stoudemire. I know starting off and seeing a stacked list of players like this is going to get you questioning, but it is important to note that none of these players have won a ring aside from Sean Marion 4 years before retiring, so that's not really going to cut it in the grand scheme of this list. At 19, you got the Atlanta Hawks. At point guard, you got Trae Young. At shooting guard, Bud Hudson. Small forward, Dominique Wilkins. At power forward, Bob Pettit. And at center, you have Dikembe Mutombo. A solid lineup, but not a whole lot to say outside of that. And at 18, we have the inspiration for this video, the Toronto Raptors. And surprise, surprise, quite a few teams could beat their starting five. You guys already know the starting five from the opening of this video, and although this still is a crazy talented team, you're competing against teams that are made up of multiple top 75 players, and so this lineup just isn't gonna cut it. At 17, it's the Denver Nuggets. At point, you have the guy with probably the craziest nickname in the NBA, Fat Lever. At the 2, you have David Thompson. At the 3, you have Alex English. 4, Dan Eisel, and at center, Nikola Jokic. To some, this team might not look that impressive aside from Jokic, but those 80s Nuggets teams were a deadly squad. So having all of them in their prime alongside Jokic, well, that's deeper than most lines Charlie Sheen was going up against. At 16, we got the Kings. As mentioned with the Raptors, this is one of the teams that has multiple top 75 guys, and 2 of some of the baddest on that list. Oscar Robertson was putting up Westbrook numbers almost a half a century before Westbrook, and Tiny was one of the league's top passers during his time and consistently was in the running for MVP. And of course, adding the dominant presence of Boogie Cousins and Chris Webber alongside those two guys is just a recipe for major success. But unfortunately, there's teams that are just more successful. At 15, we have one of the oldest franchises in the entire league, which kind of makes it surprising that they're this low on the list, and that would be the New York Knicks. You have Walt Frazier and Earl Monroe in your backcourt, Carmelo Anthony and Willis Reed as your wings, and of course Patrick Ewing as the center. As mentioned, this is one of the oldest franchises in the league, but they've struggled for a long time to find any true top-tier stars. So much so that their biggest example of a homegrown star in Patrick Ewing is often tied to a theory that says that the team is actually better when he's not playing. And at 14, we got one with an even more aggressive fan base, so this should be fun. And of course, that is the Philadelphia 76ers. This one's kinda tough, because the franchise has had plenty of other stars like Wilt, Charles Barkley, or even Dr. J that would bring them much higher up on this ranking, but those players had their best seasons on other teams. So unfortunately, the Sixers are kind of just the first victim to the rules of this list. Because just looking at all of their past players, they rightfully should be higher up. But for this video, they're not. So on to the next one. And that would be the Utah Jazz at 13. With your backcourt being John Stockton and Pistol Pete, you got Adrian Dantley and Karl Malone as the small forward and power forward respectively, and Rudy Gobert at center. Now we're getting into the teams that are becoming more and more stacked with talent. But again, without a ring to share between any of these guys, their talent isn't gonna cut it with the rest of the talent that is higher up on this list. Now we move into the next category and officially begin the list of teams that would skip the play-ins altogether and hop right into the playoffs. And at 12, the first team would be the Portland Trail Blazers. Dame at the 1, Clyde Drexler at the 2, Brandon Roy at the 3, LaMarcus Aldridge at the 4, and you got Bill Walton at center. For this team, you don't really have to say much. I think it kind of speaks for itself. You have Dame, Clyde Drexler, and Bill Walton all being amazing top 75 players, and then adding Brandon Roy and LaMarcus Aldridge to that mix is just, again, a recipe for success. And honestly, they could have found their way higher up this list if Bill Walton didn't have his career derailed by injuries. Next up at 11, we have the Dallas Mavericks. Luka Doncic at the 1, Rolando Blackman at the 2, Mark Aguirre at the 3, Dirk Nowitzki at the 4, and Tyson Chandler at the 5. The only real knock against this team is that they lack a solid center. You're digging pretty deep in the crate to even get Tyson Chandler. And without a consensus number 1 franchise center, I wouldn't be mad if you swapped him out for literally anyone else. But aside from Chandler, this team is sneaky really good. Obviously, you have Dirk and Luka playing together, but both Rolando Blackman and Mark Aguirre are great players in their own respect, carrying that 84 Mavs team to the conference finals and even getting a win over the Showtime Lakers in the midst of their Western Conference dominance. Now cracking into the top 10 with the Detroit Pistons. Isaiah Thomas at the 1, Grant Hill at the 2, Dennis Rodman at the 3, Ben Wallace at the 4, and Bob Lanier at the 5. Easily the toughest defenders on this list. I mean, you really gotta give a tip of the hat to the Pistons for finding an identity and sticking to that without fault. On top of that, between pretty much everyone on this team having plenty of experience on what it takes to win a chip, I think that they're gonna be good. At 9, we got the OKC Thunder. Russell Westbrook at point, Ray Allen at the 2, Paul George at the 3, Kevin Durant at the 4, and Shawn Kemp at the 5. Honestly, probably one of my favorite lineups. I really struggled not putting these guys higher. You've got both KD and Russ in their MVP years, and luckily the Thunder had Paul George for easily his best season. Whenever you hear any of these rookies say that their favorite player growing up was PG, it's that version of Paul George they're talking about. Adding Shawn Kemp to this would be legendary, as you now not only have a lockdown rim protector, but also an offensive board vacuum. One of the things that made Steven Adams so successful with Westbrook, but with Shawn Kemp, he's just a much better version of Steven Adams. And then adding Ray Allen's shooting, that team is deadly. But unfortunately, they have to stay at 9, because at 8, we got the Milwaukee Bucks. This lineup would honestly come close to rivaling the Pistons defense, and then of course you have the person with only the second most points in NBA history with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and people forget that Giannis is now on his 4th consecutive year of averaging at least 30 and 11 with a block and a steal a game. So this lineup is easily one of the best in the league. And really at this point you should be noticing that these teams are getting to be heavy hitters. At 7 is the Houston Rockets. Your backcourt is made up of James Harden and Calvin Murphy, your wings are Rudy Tomjanovich and Moses Malone, and at center, well, you got Hakeem Olajuwon. Another lineup that is just overall a really well-rounded lineup, but more than anything, these guys, given a half-decent bench, would average 160 points a game for an entire season. You've got Moses Malone, who is currently number 10 on the all-time points list, and then James Harden, who's currently at 14 with no sign of slowing down. And then, you'd also have to deal with one of the greatest post players to ever touch a basketball court. No matter how much defense you throw at these guys, they're gonna shoot you out of the gym. At number 6 is the Miami Heat. Backcourt is Tim Hardaway and Dwayne Wade, your wings are Jimmy Butler and LeBron James, and at center you have Alonzo Mourning. This squad is really just a much more juiced up version of the Hollywood Heat. That team went on to win 2 rings, but if he had the version of Jimmy Butler that the Heat got later on, alongside a prime Alonzo Mourning, that promise of
not 2, not 3,
well, that could have actually come true. At number 5, we had the Chicago Bulls, and a couple of guys that did actually win.
not 4, not 5.
At the point, you have MVP Derrick Rose, Michael Jordan at the 2, Scottie Pippen at the 3, Horace Grant at the 4, and Artis Gilmore at the 5. I know that there's some people that say this lineup should be at least top 3 considering all of the championships that they won, and I do love pairing up D Rose with Michael Jordan and Scottie, but with Dennis Rodman on the Pistons, you gotta put Horace Grant at the 4. And Gilmore is a great player as well, but having those guys at the 4 and 5 kind of weighs this lineup down. But just the fact that they are this high up speaks to the greatness of Michael and Scottie and how much better they would be with Derrick Rose alongside them. If they did have an MVP level big throughout their entire history, well, they could have been pushed up to the very top of the list. But they stop at 5, because at 4 you have the absolute juggernaut with the Golden State Warriors. Steph Curry at the 1, Klay Thompson at the 2, Rick Barry at the 3, Draymond Green at the 4, and Wilt Chamberlain at the 5. This was the year that Wilt averaged 50 for the season, but I'm 1000% sure that won't happen again. Either way though, this was when Wilt was at his most dominant, and any way you cut it, that dominance was still the highest we've seen over any other generation. Not to mention, you're getting the Splash Brothers at their peak running alongside Draymond, and then of course Rick Barry keeping it classy with the granny shot, while keeping it very unclassy off the court. Which just leaves us with 3 teams left, the Spurs, the Lakers, and the Celtics. All 3 of these franchises are historic within their own right, and throughout that history, they've attracted plenty of talented players. So deciding between these top 3 was a tough decision. But ultimately, I went with the Boston Celtics at number 3. You got Bob Cousy at the point, Paul Pierce at shooting guard, Jason Tatum at small forward, Larry Bird at the power forward, and Bill Russell at center. With this lineup, you're pretty much covering every aspect. Bob Cousy's playmaking, Tatum and Pierce's ISO to open up Larry Bird, and Bill Russell locking it down on defense alongside with his near unmatched IQ for the game. It's a great squad, and I'm not mad if you think that they should be number 1. But this isn't your video, it's mine, and that means that the finals we have are the Spurs and the Lakers, cause fuck a conference. Now again, both of these lineups are dynasty level lineups, so either way being this high up is a massive compliment. I already expect to take an ass whooping that is definitely not OSHA approved in the comments section, but if you're a Spurs fan, don't be mad you're not number 1, cause yeah, spoilers, you're not number 1. You have an all-time legendary lineup. You already have proof with success of David Robinson and Tim Duncan, then adding Tony Parker, a major piece to the mid-2010 Spurs teams that were a dynasty within themselves. James Silas isn't an all-time legend, but he was an amazing player during his peak, getting the second most MVP votes for that 75-76 season. But then you have, in my opinion, probably one of the most underrated players in the history of basketball, and that's George the Iceman Gervin. For a stretch throughout the late 70s into the early 80s, George was consistently one of the top players in the league, a 4-time scoring champion and a 9-time All-Star. You could even argue that he was robbed of an MVP a time or two. But either way, he retired averaging 25 points for his career and currently sits inside the top 20 for all-time points. And he very well would have finished higher up on that list if the Spurs didn't trade him to the Bulls for a rebuild and the Bulls didn't let him walk because they already had Michael Jordan, as he was still an all-star averaging 21 points per game up until a year before he left the NBA. But that's where the Spurs land, because no matter how good that lineup is, it's not better than what the Lakers can put out there. For your greatest all-time starting five, you have Magic Johnson at the point, the logo Jerry West at shooting guard, small forward you got Kobe Bryant, power forward James Worthy, and at center you have Shaquille O'Neal. To me, this was actually kind of surprising, because outside of Shaq, the Lakers drafted every one of these players on this list. And if you go back and watch some of the other videos on this channel, a big criticism I have of the Lakers is that they're known for buying their way to championships. But again, outside of Shaq, out of all of the players that they have had, the ones that they've actually drafted ended up being the ones to have their best years with the Lakers. You could argue that Kareem had better years in LA than Milwaukee, but for me, he won 3 MVPs in each city, but with the Bucks, he was actually able to lead them to a championship. He wasn't able to bring the Lakers even to the finals until Magic showed up. But I think this lineup speaks for itself. You have debatably the best point guard in the history of the sport, one of the most dedicated players in the history of the sport, one of the most dominant players in the history of the sport, paired up with the guy who's literally the logo for the damn sport. Then to add James Worthy, a guy who still found a way to average 20 points a game while playing alongside Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Magic Johnson, well, that's a special team. And that's it. Like I said, feel free to fire off in the comments section. We're here for your feedback.